All right, here are the notes that you guys missed on Thursday. It's on what's called simple harmonic motion. This is just, it's kind of a physics type thing. The definition is here. It's the repetitive movement back and forth through an equilibrium or central position, so through like a middle point, so that the maximum displacement on one side of the position is equal to the maximum displacement on the other, which pretty much means how high it goes up from that position, it also goes the same amount low. So some examples are a spring with a mass on it, or a pendulum. If you think of how a pendulum works, it swings out, goes to a center position, swings out to the other side the same amount. The movement of electrons, because they move in a circular motion, is actually harmonic. And then sound waves. If you think of what a sound wave looks like, it actually looks like a sine wave. So it goes up and then comes down and up and down. That's how the vibrations work. So these are going to go back to when we talked about graphing sine graphs. So I have some examples on the next page of what the equations will look like. So these are your very physicsy equations. They actually are the same letters that we were using before. They're just the physics letters instead of the math letters. So this here is still your amplitude, but the physics word for amplitude is it's going to use the word displacement. So if it talks about the displacement, the maximum displacement or the minimum displacement, we're going to put that in front because it's really just the amplitude. It's the height of that it reaches. The W here, I'm really going to think of that as B. That's what we're going to use to find the period. And the period, when you're reading the word problems, it's going to talk about the amount of time it takes to complete one cycle. So when it talks about that, that's talking about the period, which if you look at this formula here, we could think of it as 2 pi over b, same formula we talked about before. And then the other letters here that are new, D stands for the displacement at any time. And T, I hope you know what T stands for. T is going to stand for time, usually in seconds, but it'll tell you in the problem. So let's look at some examples. So when you look at these examples, you're going to have to decide which formula to use. And I'm going to rewrite these with the letters we use. So D sine BT, or D equals a cosine BT. So we have to look for context clues to tell us whether it's sine or cosine. So if we read through the first one, it says a ball on a spring is pulled 6 inches below its rest position, then released. The period for this motion is 4 seconds. Write an equation for the ball's simple harmonic motion. All right, so we got a couple things here. It told us the displacement. It doesn't say the word displacement, but it's telling you that it's getting pulled 6 inches down. So that's telling you the amplitude is, and we're going to write -6 because it went down. And it also told us that our period is 4 seconds. With the period being 4 seconds, that does not tell us what B is. So you actually have to set this equal to the formula for period, which is 2 pi over B. And you have to solve this to figure out what we're going to plug in for B so we get a period of 4. And my suggestion would be to use the magic elevator. And then we end up with B is equal to 2 pi over 4, which is really just pi over 2. So we've got all the information we need. We just have to decide now what we're going to do, sine or cosine. So if you read it carefully, it's telling you that it's being pulled downward, which means it starts at a minimum. So you just have to think about which one is going to start at the minimum. And hopefully you remember sine, because it has 9, it starts at an intercept. So that would mean it starts at the resting position. And cosine will either start at a max or a min, depending on if it's positive or negative. So since this one starts at a minimum, that's where the negative comes in. It's going to be D equals -6 cosine, since it starts at the minimum. The B is going to get plugged in, pi over 2, and then T. So that's the answer. Let's try the next one. A ball on a spring begins at resting position, then is released. It oscillates upward to a displacement of 5 inches, and it takes 2 seconds to complete one cycle. Write an equation for the ball's simple harmonic motion. So we know it starts at resting position, and that it has a displacement of 5 inches, so that's going to be A. A is 5. and especially because it goes upwards. That's why it's positive 5, because it goes upwards. And then it takes 2 seconds to complete one cycle. So that's their way of telling you the period. It's just word way. One cycle means the whole period. The period is 2. So to find b, I have to set that equal to 2 pi over b. And solve, flip these over. I get 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. So that tells me b equals pi. And then that last piece of information is it starts at resting position. That means it's starting at the intercept. So that tells me that we're going to use sine. So final answer would be D is equal to, plug in A, 5, sine, plug in B, pi, t. Hopefully that makes sense. The next thing we're going to talk about is what's called the frequency. The frequency says the number of complete cycles that can happen per 1 unit of time. So if we're measuring it in seconds, how many cycles the object will get through in 1 second. It's really just the reciprocal of the period. So if you look at the formula here, frequency is really just b over 2 pi. I'm going to rewrite it with our letters. These are the physicsy letters here. Or what this is just saying is that it's the reciprocal of the period. You flip the period over. 1 over the period means the reciprocal. So in the next example, they actually give you your equation and you have to answer the question. So the first one says the maximum displacement, which that really is just another word for the amplitude. That's what it's going to say. It'll say displacement here, but that's just your amplitude, which is 12. The frequency, we have to use the formula for. So we're going to do b over 2 pi. Which b in the problem is pi over 4. Since it's a fraction, I can't divide it by 2 pi as a fraction, so I'm going to write divided by 2 pi, and then I'm going to flip it. So it's going to be times 1 over 2 pi, and then the pi's cancel, and I get 1/8. That means in 1 second, we only get through 1/8 of the cycle. And then the last thing is the period, which we already, the time required for 1 cycle, that means the period. I read into that faster than I explained it. So you're going to use the period formula, 2 pi over b, which would be 2 pi divided by pi over 4, which is really 2 pi times flip the fraction, 4 over pi. The pi's cancel again. I just get 8. It's going to take 8 seconds for it to get through 1 cycle, which now if you look at those the last 2 answers together, first off, you should notice their reciprocals. The second thing you should notice is that the relationship to each other. If it takes 8 seconds to complete 1 cycle, then what the frequency is saying is that in 1 second, I can only get through 1/8 of the cycle. That's what the frequency means. If I had only 1 second, how much of the cycle would happen? All right. This is the last type of problem. We are looking for the equation, and they're actually talking about, this is a music example. So the third string of a guitar on fret 0 has a frequency of 196 vibrations per second. Write an equation in the form 2 pi equals sine WT, so that's really sine BT for the simple harmonic motion. So the only thing the equation is really asking us to find is B. We have to figure that out. And they gave us the frequency. We know the frequency is equal to 196. So you just have to use the formula for frequency. I know frequency is the reciprocal of the period. So it's B over 2 pi is going to equal 196. And then to solve this, to get rid of the 2 pi, we just have to multiply it on that side. B is going to equal 382 pi. 392 pi. I didn't grab my calculator. 392 pi. And then to answer the question, you just have to take that as B and plug it in up there. So it's going to be D is equal to sine 392 pi t. That's it. Try the homework, and we will catch up when you guys get back in class, and we'll make a plan. Good luck. Get some rest. Love you, girls. Take care.